Y'all saw this coming. The talk of political machines only had one logical outcome. We need to talk about the one that everyone actually fucking knows. He's the original G, the Kingfish himself, carrying the title of second most based American politician after Theodore Roosevelt, and number one most used alternate history guy in every Bloody Hearts of Iron mod ever made. This is the tale of the one and only Huey Long. We travel back in time to August 30th, 1893 to Winfield, Louisiana, where one Huey Pierce Long Jr. would pop into existence at the ripe old age of 0. He was the 7th of 9 children of a middle-class family in a pretty poor area. Few things of note about Winfield. It initially voted to remain in the Union during the Civil War, and later became a hotbed of support for the Populist Party and later even the Socialist Party. It was a comparatively progressive area, all things considered, and these ideas quickly rubbed off on the young Huey Long. He also quickly evolved into the exact opposite of your average rural farmer at the time. Since his family wasn't completely impoverished, he became very well-read and learned to despise the hard farm life. He had nothing against it, he just really didn't want to do it, which, I mean, fair enough. As he grew older, most of the jobs he held were as far removed from farm labor as you could possibly get. He was by all accounts an incredibly smart guy, and because his parents could actually afford to send him to school, he did just that. He also had a general disdain for authority, and he would get kicked out of high school in 1910 for criticizing the teaching staff a little too efficiently. This did mean that he never did earn a high school diploma, though. Huey was just built different, so he went to university anyway. He couldn't attend LSU because of lack of diploma, so he would try his hand at the Louisiana Baptist University in 1911. During this time, he would make some money as a traveling salesman. He spent exactly one semester at LBU before deciding, fuck being a preacher, I'ma be a lawyer instead. He got into University of Oklahoma in 1912, again for a single semester. He did that thing all college kids do, you know, just not go to class because fuck that noise, I got a life to live here. For all his intelligence, he bombed hard and blew literally all of his money on gambling. Despite having no money, he still managed to find love. He married one Rose McConnell in 1913 at a hotel in Memphis. They would have 3 children together, Rose, Russell, and Palmer Reed. Soon after, Huey would attend Tulane University in New Orleans, this time actually putting that brain of his to good use and kicking serious ass. After a single year, he petitioned to take the bar exam early, took it, and passed it with flying colors. All of this by the age of 21. Now it was time to get down to business. His time as a salesman had taught him how to build connections with people from all walks of life. It also brought him down to earth, so to speak, as being a salesman is a very unforgiving job, and any shift in the already fragile economy could mean sleeping on a bench for a few weeks. Times like those will teach any man the value of loving thy neighbor. Altogether, this gave him great people skills and deepened his beliefs about the common man. In 1915, he would open his law office in Winfield above the bank. He would gain a reputation as a guy who fought for the little man, going as far as winning a court battle against the very bank that his place sat on. He finally had money coming in as a result, and one particularly big case saw him take home enough cash to build his family a new house in Shreveport. His image grew further with every upper-class fellow he pissed off, picking legal fights with every big business he could and lobbying the state government to bring in work reform legislation. From here, he elected to adopt the fuck it we ball mindset. He was gonna shoot for the moon and he wasn't gonna fucking miss. His next step was politics, because if you are a lawyer, it is one of your exactly 2 options in life. In 1918, he would earn a seat on the Louisiana Railroad Commission, spiting every big business in the state in the process. He continued his fight for the little guy, doing everything in his power to resist monopolistic practices and price hikes on services. It would be renamed to the Public Services Commission, and he would become its chairman in 1922. His power ever increasing, he took on bigger and bigger opponents, suing the Cumberland Telephone Company for unjust rate hikes and crushing them in front of the Supreme Court of the United States. At this point, he was loved by most common folk in the state of Louisiana and reviled by everyone who wasn't them. And all he had done was be a kick-ass lawyer with a strong moral compass. Of course, though, there was still a ways up to go from here. Huey was an aggressive ladder climber, and even now he was preparing to flip the political poker table and cause a bit of chaos in the establishment. So he set his sights on the governor's desk. Louisiana was a shithole at this point in history, plain and simple. It was run by the other kind of political machine, i.e. all of the greed and lust for power with none of the helping people out. Public education basically didn't exist, and nobody could afford to send their kids to school, so a quarter of all adults were illiterate. Poll taxes disenfranchised the lower classes, and these lower classes also paid higher taxes because the rich were in bed with the government. The entire state was all dirt roads and barely traversable rivers, and with a primarily agricultural economy, any disaster or inclement weather would severely cripple entire communities. New Orleans was a reasonably well-off area, but it relied heavily off of shipping, which would become a severe issue when the very funny times arrived. The French Quarter of New Orleans also became a tourist hotspot, which had the side effect of driving up rent and property prices, pushing away plenty of unique artistic and architectural talent. Sure, it was still the roaring 20s, and if you lived in the cities and had money, things were alright, but for the vast majority of people, the state kind of sucked. Huey looked at this and went, I can fix her. In 1924, he made a bid for the office. He was only 30, comparatively incredibly young to be shooting for the job, but he did it anyway because he didn't give a fuck what anyone thought. He joined up with the Democrats. I am starting to notice a pattern here. He railed against the New Orleans political machine in the most cosmic twist of irony of all time, primarily for their association with a certain Standard Oil. Now, a slight tangent about them since they will be a consistent issue. Standard Oil was functionally destroyed in 1911 and its successors divided up the remains. Standard Oil of Louisiana fell under the jurisdiction of Esso, New Jersey, now known as ExxonMobil. They had a total monopoly on petroleum in the state for several decades, had a big fuck-off refinery in Baton Rouge, and had an obscene amount of influence in the politics of the state. In essence, Louisiana was a colony of New Jersey for a while. This is canon, I run the channel, my word is law. Huey made a point of fighting them at every turn, because who the fuck wants to be associated with New Jersey, and they would be best frenemies for the rest of his life. Anyways, in the election, he also ran on an exclusively economic platform, disregarding the commonplace race baiting completely, which made him a pretty standout individual. But regardless, he would finish third in the race. He blamed the rain, since his voter base was mostly rural and there was like one whole paved road in the entire state, so his people couldn't actually vote for him. He wasn't about to back down though. He did some brand research, got some goons together, and decided to take some more notes from his humble beginnings in Winfield. In other words, he embraced hitherto unseen levels of populism. In 1928, he would try again. Traveling the entire state, he held enough speeches and rallies to kill your average man. His energy was quite infectious and he quickly spiked hard in popularity. He promised all of the reforms that were desperately needed and railed against everyone in the state that was even moderately opposed to him. And of course, he broke out a banger campaign slogan, "Every man a king." He swept the shit out of the election, winning by the largest landslide in the state's history against a, granted kind of irrelevant, Republican challenger after taking the Democratic primary with a significant lead. His victory brought together literally everyone. White, black, French, Catholic, Protestant, rural, urban, didn't matter. Let me reiterate, he got the English and the French to agree on something. Now that takes skill. His victory would literally reorient the politics of the state around him instead of traditional lines for 2 decades. This pissed everyone off, so Long had to act quickly. He adopted many of the tactics used by the machine before him out of sheer necessity. First things first, he fired everyone and replaced them with his loyalists. He did still believe in meritocracy, and he made sure that the loyalists would actually all be good at their fucking job. After this, he started smashing through bills left, right, and center. He faced stiff resistance, but he was the one with a loaded gun, so he succeeded greatly, reforging Louisiana in his image and actually making good on his promises. In fact, we are gonna have a lightning round. Here's just some of the cool stuff he did during his time in office. Massive infrastructure campaigns, paving 5,000 miles of road and building over 100 bridges in 4 years, massively increasing the ease of business and transport in the state. Healthcare expansion, building a bunch of new public hospitals and expanding the charity ones that already existed. While he was at it, he overhauled institutions for the mentally ill and dumped a shitload of money into improving access to therapy and dental care as a neat little bonus. Started a program which made all primary school textbooks in the state free, allowing for much easier access to education for the masses. He turned Louisiana State University from a mid-as-fuck school that nobody cared about into one of the finest post-secondary institutions in the South. Enrollment tripled, the campus expanded, tuition was lowered, and a whole-ass med-school was added to further assist with the healthcare reform. He also co-wrote a bunch of songs and marches for the university, most notably Touchdown for LSU, which is still used today. To pay for all of this stuff, he rebuilt the tax system and struck hard at big businesses. He slashed taxes across the board overall and reduced utility rates in the same breath to reduce cost of living at the expense of these big businesses. He made an alliance with some of the old guard in New Orleans to reduce the pushback on his policies in exchange for developing the city some more. He built a seawall to reduce flooding, constructed the airport, expanded the port facilities, and in general made the city a nicer place to be. He would also build a new state capitol building to contain his army of bureaucrats, which would become the largest capitol building in the United States. When the Great Depression arrived, it still hit hard. The farmers still got smoked and much of the state slid further into poverty. However, the state got off pretty alright compared to the rest of the country. Huey massively increased spending, funding massive public works projects to keep people employed and raising wages across the board. He would also place a halt on foreclosures to prevent people from losing their homes. This action had the side effect of forcing banks to not be fucking stupid, and as a result, bank failures in the state became very rare, softening the crisis even more. Finally, he abolished poll taxes near the end of his career as a final fuck you to the people he took over from. To say he transformed the state during his time would be an understatement. understatement. Of course, though, he did have to embrace the machinist tactics of his opponents. He would not hesitate to bribe people into supporting him, stack every level of government that could be stacked, and would actively threaten and intimidate those who opposed him. He took control of the media, founding his own newspaper and ruthlessly slandering his opponents at every turn. He utilized his oratorical abilities and exploited populism to bring the people on his side, which gave him the ability to completely ruin people if he so chose by sending the masses after them. And if he couldn't drive public opinion, he simply sent armed thugs to do a little convincing. Everyone who worked with him had to pay into a rainy day fund used for electoral campaigning because he didn't have a lot of wealthy supporters to pay for shit. Most paid in because it was either a few dollars off their paychecks or losing their job. He was mocked as a dictator by his conservative rivals, to which he usually responded, "Pull up, bitch, I'll show you a fucking dictator." Paraphrasing, of course. He became quite content in his position and did everything he could to hold on to power, and democracy was basically suspended for his time in the spotlight. He gets compared to Stalin and Hitler by some, while others consider him a brilliant man who did what he had to do. Once again, does using bad methods to do good things make you a bad person? Anyways, his enemies were quick to capitalize on his authoritarian tendencies and struck back hard. In 1929, he brought forward a proposal to jack taxes on oil production in a special legislative session. Our old friends in Standard Oil were naturally a bit miffed about this, and all of the people they had in their pocket were obliged to be miffed as well. So anti-Long politicians called for a flash impeachment vote. 19 charges were brought against him, including one for attempting to convince a guy to murder one of his opponents when he was drunk one time. Paul Sear, Long's right-hand man and lieutenant governor, even supported the charges, specifically the ones about nepotism. Shenanigans ensue and a literal rumble broke out in the House building, which saw everyone beating the shit out of each other, in an incident known as Bloody Monday. Bit of a flair for the dramatic if you couldn't tell. Anyways, the House got him on 8 of the charges and he did indeed get impeached. Huey promptly went, "Oh fuck," and then scapegoated Standard Oil as the instigator to the whole thing in several very disgruntled speeches. Both sides were in a screaming match for a while, bribing anyone who would listen. Huey succeeded in bribing harder though, and stacked things in such a way that the impeachment would be irrelevant, so it was thrown out by the Senate. Shortly after, he would earn his nickname, the Kingfish. After that whole shit show, Huey decided to run for Senate in 1930. He did this as a referendum of sorts, and if he lost, he said he would take it as the people not wanting him and he would resign. Well, Pete fucking won handily, obviously. Of course though, the campaign was heated and almost got violent, and even saw some of Huey's goons literally kidnap a critic of his who was going to go public with his corruption. Now, that Sear fellow wasn't stoked about all of this. Technically, Huey never got sworn in because he was deathly afraid that Sear would fuck with his stuff when he was gone, so the seat was technically vacant. His fear was well-founded because Sear decided that he couldn't be both senator and governor, and he had forfeited governorship when he won the Senate seat. So in 1931, Sear staged a fucking coup and had himself sworn in as governor. Well, this made Huey a little upset, so he sicked the National Guard on the guy and got the Supreme Court to get him out. His replacement as LT was Alvin King, president of the Senate and personal friend of Huey. Once his term of governorship expired, he got a buddy of his elected who would do his bidding, and he fucked off to Washington to actually be senator. He basically plug-walked into the Senate and called everyone on all sides an asshole who hated the American people. Based. He initially backed Roosevelt in 1932, but quickly broke with him on the grounds of the New Deal not going far enough. As part of the campaign, he even got the first woman elected to a full term in the Senate by heavily supporting her, in Arkansas no less. In Washington, he flew off the handle, launching into impassioned speeches every other day, filibustering everything, and generally being a nuisance. The Senate responded by passing literally none of what he proposed. This made him a shitload of enemies. Roosevelt called him dangerous, and would go out of his way to screw with his control over Louisiana by backing his opponents. Most of the media thought that he was a nut at best and a radical demagogue at worst. Huey, for his part, didn't seem to care that much. He locked horns with Standard Oil again, openly calling for the support of Paraguay in the Chaco War, and blaming them for starting it. Afterwards, he would slide into an isolationist position. Overall, he was kinda just a shit poster since he didn't have enough support to actually get anything done, but he certainly made a splash. The main thing he would push for during this time was the Share Our Wealth program. In essence, it was a series of very progressive things. This would include a cap on personal fortunes, free post-secondary education, a national stipend, kinda like universal basic income, pensions, and even a 30-hour work week. He pushed for more economic regulation, especially in the area of banks and corporations, huge public works and land reclamation projects, and even free universal healthcare. Much of this policy is outlined in his book, My First Days in the White House, which is an incredibly interesting read, and I highly recommend it. It gives a very good look into the psyche of this guy, and what his ideal Huey Long presidency would look like. Ideal is the key word there, because because while the American people loved him, opinions from the lads in Washington were much less friendly. Most people in power thought he was crazy and that he was basically a communist. Huey disagreed and thought the whole communism thing was a bit cringe, figuring that if you wanted to get rid of the communists, you just had to give them no reason to exist. Most economists also considered it unrealistic and that Huey's math was completely fucked, but he didn't really care what other people thought. When the Dems shut the door on him, he took matters into his own hands and formed the Share Our Wealth Society, a network of political clubs across America that would act in opposition to the Democratic Party and promote longism to the masses. These clubs would come to have over 7.5 million members nationwide. He had his audience and was polling extremely high, which scared a lot of people. Everything seemed set for Huey to have a shot at his ultimate dream, the president's desk. However, there was trouble on the home front. He had made so many enemies at this point that his home was attacked by gunmen and there were militias in Louisiana forming to actively revolt against him. And there was 1,000,001 assassination plots brewing all at once, but no matter how many bugs he squashed and how many bodyguards he hired, they never went away. Eventually, they finally got one up on the Kingfish. On September 8th of 1935, Huey was in the state legislature of Baton Rouge trying to get one of his enemies out of a job when one Carl Weiss walked up while he was distracted and shot him. Weiss was instantly mulched by Huey's guards, but that couldn't stop fate. 2 days later, he would die of internal bleeding at the age of 42. His last words were reportedly, "God, don't let me die, I have so much to do." Corruption immediately swept the state and hundreds were arrested over the next few years. After the storm calmed down, his machine would remain influential until the 1960s, meddling in politics long after his death. Earl Long, Huey's brother, would sort of take up the mantle and would have several successful years as governor later down the line. This kicked off the Long dynasty, as several of his family members would go on to have successful political careers, which included his wife, who took over his Senate seat. At the federal level, moderate versions of many of his programs did make it into the more leftist Second New Deal during 1935 and 36, so he would leave an imprint on federal policy in the afterlife. As previously stated, he is a somewhat controversial figure. He's either a hero and uplifter of the masses or an authoritarian shitbag drunk on power, depending on who's telling the story. Ultimately, politics is a dirty game, and despite his methods, he created change on his own terms in a world that fought tooth and nail to oppose it. People like him are a tragically rare breed, especially in this day and age. He certainly deserves criticism, as everyone does, but ultimately, he made people's lives better and made a permanent mark on the world. And honestly, what more can you ask for? That about does it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.